Hello and welcome to Funded Futures, the podcast. My name is Emily. I'm your host, and today I'm joined by Kirstin Hunter, who is the Managing Director of Techstars Australia. She is the co-founder and former CEO of Future Super. She is a mentor, she is a trained lawyer and a mother. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's a miracle I was able to actually remember all of those things,
Nailed
honestly. I try my best. I feel like I wanted to say, you're what I want to be when I grow up.
Oh, you.
Honestly, I feel like you're so accomplished, and it was really interesting doing all of my research before having you on here, because I was just sitting there thinking, how do you have the time to do all of these things? And you're here from Sydney as well. You've just got so much on your plate. How do you do it?
Look, it's a really great question. I think, one thing to say is all of the things that I have done and that I do, it looks like a lot, but I'm pretty good at kind of staggering things. And I'm a big believer of the fact that you can't have it all. You definitely can't have it all at once. And so the way that I've been able to manage my career over time, the way that I manage my day-to-day is as much about being really firm and strict on what I say no to as it is about what I do agree to do.
That was one of my 2025 resolutions, was saying no more often.
It's a good one.
It's hard, right? I feel like I say yes to everything. I overload my plate, and then I feel like I disappoint myself more than I disappoint others because I want to give everything to everybody else. Is that something that you struggle with?
It definitely was earlier on in my career, I think. I used to be, and you'll find this as well, like when you're someone who has a reputation, especially in a big firm, as being competent and able to get things done, you're a safe pair of hands, you're the person who a lot of people go to when they need an extra bit of help. And so I found early on in my career, I was just getting a lot of interesting stuff to do, but that actually didn't help me kind of further my ambitions or really deepen the craft that I was kind of working on as well. And so I had this big realization that actually saying no to some of those opportunities to be able to focus more on the things that really move the needle for me, and then later on really move the needle for the business, was a really big discovery. Another big thing that I learned as well is that when you're in these like high growth, high ambition jobs, careers, your ability to bring energy to your job and to the people around you in your job is really what makes you successful. And so thinking about what are the jobs, the pieces of work, the tasks, the people who I surround myself with who really give me energy, and what are the things that really take my energy away? Like what are the energy vampires in my life? And then being really conscious about how I manage those two things. So things that give me energy will then flow through to everything else that I do, whereas things that are energy vampires will be the opposite. They take energy away from everything else. And so being conscious of my own energy flows, I think really helps me to be able to pack a lot into the day. And in particular as well, it's worth me saying, you did call out in the intro that I'm a mother. One of the things that gives me the most energy is getting to spend real quality time with my kid. And I can't do that if I'm distracted, if I'm on my phone. And so that ability to sort of switch off work, really focus on her, allows me to get that kind of energy recharge, which then makes me better when I go back to work.
Yeah, right. I've actually not heard that term enough, that energy vampires and sucking it away. I think last week we were discussing, this is my favourite thing, is the emotional bank account, the withdrawal and deposit system. So how do you identify what are your energy drains versus your energy builders?
Yeah, for me, I think it's pretty easy to identify. It's just a gut feeling. There are some meetings, some people, some jobs that you walk away from and you feel jazzed at the end of the day or at the end of the session, and there are some that you walk away from and you just feel depleted. And I think the biggest thing for me is recognizing that is my body telling me something about the work that I'm doing, the people that I'm working with. It's not my failure to be able to do that work.
Okay.
I think a lot of people, especially women, will be in jobs or roles where actually it's really energy draining for you, but you blame yourself. You think, I'm not ambitious enough, I'm not working hard enough, I'm not whatever, the long list of things that you tell yourself, but actually it might just be that the job is not right for you and you can thrive somewhere else that doesn't have whatever condition it is that actually is really draining your energy.
I always find that really interesting when I've got a girlfriend at the moment who's going through a bit of an issue at her job in the sense that it is so draining for her, and she feels as though when she's outside of work, all she's doing is recharging. And it just makes me think, you're not having a gun held to your head. You don't have to be in this job. Why are you continuing it? Have you known from early on in your career what gives you the energy versus what doesn't? Or have you had to learn that the hard way?
I've definitely had to learn it. Yeah, I think it's trial and error. I mean, I've had a lot of career transitions in my life as well. Like I actually started out studying medicine, then I transferred into law. I worked 3 years as a lawyer before I became a management consultant. I went from management consultants to startups. Even within startups, I've held 3 different executive roles, and then I've been managing director at Techstars for the last 2 years. So actually I have had a lot of changes in my career, and each one of those decisions at the time I think felt really daunting. You know, I remember in particular when I was leaving Bain & Company to go to Future Super, it felt like the most risky decision I could have possibly made. But in hindsight, it looks so obvious to me. And a lot of that reason why it feels obvious to me is it was so much about moving in line with my energy.
Right.
And so each one of those job transitions, I think I've learned a little bit more about what I like to do, what I'm great at, what gives me energy when I'm doing it. And I've learned a little bit more about what I don't like to do. And that allows me now, I think, to be a lot faster in detecting those things when I am in a new role. So my record for taking a job and then quitting that job is 1 week.
What?
I know. That was actually when I left Future Super. I took another job before I ended up working at Bright, which is another green fintech in the ecosystem. And yeah, I started the job. It seemed like the dream job on paper. All of the interviews had gone really well. I got in the door and it just was not a fit for the way I like to work. And I knew right away, but it was a week before I resigned, but still a week between taking a job and leaving a job, I think is pretty quick.
Yeah, that's unheard of. And I wish I met you a few years ago. I had what we call a secondment when I left Birchall really briefly and went to this job, and I realised pretty quickly that it was not the job for me, but I stuck it out for 10 months before I came back to Birchall, which is my home. And I wish that I had the courage to say within the first few weeks, this is not right for me, because I was sold the dream as well. And I think often, particularly for women, you're sold into what you think that you should want and a career that you think is right for you. Do you find that that's something that's happened to you a lot and it's made you have to think harder about where you want your direction to go?
Yeah, I do think that's right. I think as well, though, you go through different stages in your life and different stages in what you want from a career. So, for example, for me in leaving Future Super, I was the CEO, I was one of the co-founders. It was one of those all-consuming jobs. You know, I put everything into it. There was no way for me to think about what I wanted to do afterwards while I was still in the job, so I left without having something to go to. And the job that I ended up doing, not the 1 week one, I ended up spending a year at Bright, which is an amazing green fintech helping homeowners to be able to afford green energy infrastructure on their homes, like solar panels and batteries.
Amazing.
And it was a great job, great role, great team. All of the things were great, but it wasn't it wasn't the thing that was really going to drive me forward, but it was the perfect job for me at that time. I could work on something that was purpose-driven. I could work with an amazing team and I could have an impact in the business. But ultimately, when the time came for me to leave, it felt like the right time. And so when I'm talking to people who are going through those different stages in their career, moving from one job to another, especially something where you have a really big experience in a particular job, maybe you have a really traumatic workplace that you're leaving, it actually is okay to have a recovery job. But you need to recognize in yourself that this is a recovery job. And that means that you leave the baggage with the job at the door. You show up, you do your job, you do a great job, but you find your energy in your life outside of work rather than looking to work to solve all your problems.
I love that idea. Recovery job. That's really clever. And I feel like that's a really good point. I think a lot of times people are in a particular industry that they're in for a while and they feel like they can't take a break. They need to keep pushing forward. And often I feel like for women in particular, there's that ticking time bomb, because you do have to say, all right, there's going to be a point if I do want to have children that I'm going to have to stop. I need to think, does the job I currently have maternity leave? Does it have the ability for me to come back and not have sacrificed too much, or, you know, the learning curve when I come back is going to be too steep? How did you navigate that when you had a child?
Oh, such a big question. So the context for me was I had my daughter when I was working at Bain & Company, so global management consulting firm, client-driven work, known to be very sort of intensive on hours. And I think any kind of client-driven job, when the client wants something, you have to deliver it. And so you have those kind of external demands that make it a little bit more unpredictable. And the received wisdom at the time was that women should get to partner before they have a child, because once you're at a partner level, you can control your own destiny a little bit more. You become the meeting maker instead of the meeting taker. I was a consultant level, so kind of midway through the hierarchy, but it was the right time for me. And what ended up actually happening was there were 5 of us women at the consultant level who all fell pregnant at the same time. There were a couple
matching up your cycles, but in the weirdest
like
possible way.
Lots of jokes about something in the water. But because there were so many of us, the company actually recognised this big opportunity to really experiment with us around how you could make working as a parent work with a consulting job. And so we had amazing support from the company in our return to work. We had support to trial a bunch of different flexible working models. Like, it really was just this most incredible period, even though we were all having babies at what was perceived to be the wrong time. And so I think, like, the thing about babies, children, family, there's never a good time in your career. And I think this goes for both men and women in a sort of heterosexual relationship, or either birthing and non-birthing parent in other relationships. But there is no good time, but your life will adapt because it has to. Like, you actually have no choice. And so it's kind of good in that way. It's like, just rip the Band-Aid off and you'll figure out the career bit later. I think as well, the way I kind of think about it now as a leader in a business is I want the businesses that I work with to have the kind of flexibility that anyone in the company can get sick and take time out of the workforce, can care for a relative if they need it and take time out of the workforce, can have a child if they want to and take time out of the workforce. Like, we actually should be building businesses that have the flexibility that people can step in and out of the business without the business falling over. Like, it's a huge risk if you can't afford to have someone out of your business for 6 or 12 months for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so being able to build those systems where people can come and go and the business can continue without them, I think is such a good risk management strategy for a business leader. And parental leave is a great way to test whether or not you have that flexibility in place, because parental leave, you can plan it. When roughly, give or take, plus or minus a month in most situations, when that child's going to come. If it's the non-birthing parent, you can plan with them when they're going to take the bulk of their leave. You don't have that luxury in illness or, in other kind of life events that make someone have to take time out of work. So I think parental leave is kind of a safe planning option for businesses to test their workforce resilience.
Absolutely. I'm sure for a lot of people who might be listening to this, they might be part of a startup, and so they're running on a really lean operation in terms of body count. How do you think that those kinds of businesses can set themselves up to be efficient if people do need to step back briefly? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think startups, any kind of small team, it is tough and you feel it because it's different if you're working in, I don't know, like a big accounting firm and there are thousands of people and there's probably hundreds of people at your level. It's easy to say you can step in and out and someone can take over. It is more hard in a startup, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. And I think, we want people to be able to take holidays and leave to be able to recharge as well. Taking 4 weeks out is not that different to taking 4 months or 6 months. Like actually you just kind of adapt.
Yeah.
And so I think the two elements for startups and small businesses to consider is sort of the cost. Obviously you're paying someone who's not in the business while they're out on leave. That can feel like an expense that you're not getting a reward for, but actually the reward comes in the years that follow after that person comes back to work, because they have that loyalty, they have that purpose, they have that real sense of why they're there.
Yeah.
Actually, I think most parents come back to work and they're better employees than they were when they left, because they are ace at prioritization. And so, recognizing that the cost of funding parental leave isn't just that period when the person's out of the workforce. You're actually getting this amazing dedicated employee for the next couple of years, and that's what you're funding. So the cost part is one, and then the kind of work distribution is the other. And so those are the two elements I think to be conscious of. And the work distribution also is quite hard, especially if you've got someone who's highly skilled. But again, you want that person, if they fall ill, to be able to be sick and not be at work. So just as much as you need to have those, work management systems in place to deal with that eventuality, you need to have it in place to deal with parental leave. So I think anything is possible, provided that you take the right approach to kind of planning and thinking about your team, your structures, and have that long-term view around building a business where people can thrive for their whole working life rather than just for a short period of time, burn out, and then go somewhere else.
Yeah, 100%. I think I see it a lot. We obviously work with a lot of startups. So you do see that if one person goes, a lot of things just kind of tumble over, or people just forget about it. And it's such a shame. But I think if people are to put those parameters in place going forward and think about the strategy in case somebody does, God forbid, have something happen to them and they can't be there for any reason, I think that's a really great point. So a large part of what you do is mentoring women in the workplace. Can you describe how you got into that and what makes you so passionate about it?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think how I got into mentoring women in particular, why I'm so passionate about it, is I was a recipient of some incredible mentoring early in my career. And it's the thing that kept me in consulting so long, was the really incredible managers who I worked for, the people in the business who took an interest in me. And that was not just in the Australian practice, that was globally, because I met incredible people at the global training who stayed in touch. So you build this kind of network of supporters around you and people who you can reach out to no matter what's going on. And I felt that benefit in terms of the acceleration in my career, in terms of the kind of confidence and energy that I felt in going through the job. And so it was natural for me when I got to a certain point to then start paying that forward. In consulting, I think it's very mentoring is built into the system in a really effective way, at least at Bain & Company where I worked it was, where you have these kind of formal mentoring relationships where you have this your formal mentoring relationship comes with an actual, work-related responsibility, which is your job as a mentor is to pull together all of the various reviews from the project that this person has worked on, and then that becomes their consensus review. So you have a formal job, but then you also have the informal side of helping this person navigate difficult challenges. And I just loved it, and I had felt the benefit myself in having great mentors, and it was a huge source of energy for me being able to mentor other people and to see that advice that I had been able to give them have an impact in their career. The other thing as well, I think, is, people often don't recognize that mentoring is a benefit to the mentor, not just to the mentee. Sometimes I find I don't realize how much I know about something until someone else asks me a question. And so that mentoring relationship allows me to clarify my thoughts, really reflect on experiences that I've had and what I've learnt from them. In some cases, it allows me to get a lot of closure on painful experiences that I've had in the workplace. So as a mentor, it brings me a heap of energy. And so I enjoy paying it forward. I also kind of have a value around pay it forward that means that I get a lot of sort of personal satisfaction from being a mentor in the community. And then I think the other big piece of it for me is I have a really hard time accepting injustice. And I think as you get more senior as a woman in business in Australia, I'm sure it's the same anywhere else, you start to see more and more the way the systemic barriers hold women back. And so if I can do a part in helping the next generation of women find their way through those barriers more effectively, then I think that sort of contributes to a long-term change in business culture, which is better for everybody.
For sure. So if you're looking for a mentor, what advice would you give when you're trying to find one?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it feels like a lot of pressure early on in your career to find a mentor. And I mean, I do have people reach out to me asking me to mentor them, you know, from a cold approach. And I think that's really difficult because it's hard to know how you can really bring value as a mentor. And I think it's hard to really commit. Mentoring takes time and it takes a lot of emotional energy. So the way I kind of used to think about it was when you're looking for a mentor, you're kind of looking for someone who has a couple of different things, not necessarily all of them, but you want someone who either has a mindset or skills or knowledge that you want to learn from. You want to look up to that person. You want to find them inspiring in some way, and you want to have some kind of chemistry between them. Because if there's no chemistry in the relationship, it's going to feel forced all the time. You're not going to get the value out of it, and your mentor's not going to get the value out of it either. And so the advice that I give to women earlier on in their career who are looking for mentors is find those people who you connect with, you know, and you don't have to force a connection with someone, but you can be opportunistic about it. So if you're at an event and someone on the panel says something that really, you know, it really inspires you or really makes your brain tick, drop them a note on LinkedIn and tell them what you liked about what they said. Like, as someone who does a fair bit of panels, there's nothing better than getting those messages afterwards.
It's so nice, isn't it?
It's so lovely. And then, you know, and you often don't realize, or you'll come off a panel and you'll be like, oh man, did I just say the most stupid stuff? You know, you're filled with self-doubt as well. And so having someone drop you a note and be like, I really have been thinking a lot about this little thing that you said. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. You know, that makes you stand out in that person's mind. If you're at an event and someone on the panel offers to give advice on a topic or to catch up with you on a topic, be the one who reaches out and takes them up on that offer. You know, like, again, it's something that you might offer a lot of the time. You know, if anyone wants advice on strategy after this session, drop me an email and I'm happy to give you my thoughts. I can say that with pretty good confidence that no one's going to do it. But if you're the one who does it, then you get my attention on that thing. And then I think build that relationship over time, nurture the relationship rather than kind of, you know, trying to go all in and pick that person's brain. You'll get more out of it long term if you have a strong relationship with the person.
It feels like dating. Like you're not the one who wants to be the one who makes the first move, essentially. It's scary. What if that person turns around and says, sorry, I don't have the time? Or, you know, I think often a no response is the best response. At least you tried. At least you put yourself out there and you've said, hey, I'd love to get to know you from like a mentee perspective in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think though, like in those scenarios you described, like if someone writes back and says, hey, thanks, I don't have time, like they're not sitting there in their back of their mind thinking, Emily's now on my blacklist. I'm going to do everything I can to undermine her career. You know, it's just like they would just reply and say, hey, thanks for asking, but actually I don't have time. And that's the last that they'll think about it, you know, until you reach out again. And then, you know, maybe next time you see them or they post something on LinkedIn and you comment and then they're like, oh, Emily, I remember her, you know. And so it doesn't have to be the final answer if they say, I don't have time right now. And it also isn't a bad thing. You know, like we want people to say no if they don't have time. We don't want them to promise us something and then not be able to deliver. So I think if the worst case scenario is someone says no, then that's okay. You don't lose anything by asking and being told no.
It's a shame there's not a matchmaking service for mentors and mentees.
I think there are a couple of companies that do that. There's definitely one called One Up, One Down that does mentor matching. You know, there are a few that have tried to get traction in the space,
That's really interesting. Yeah. So I know you said that part of your passion for mentoring women in the business space comes from witnessing injustices in their careers. Do you have any stories where you could pinpoint what's kind of spurred you on to really push forward with the mentoring?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple, right? And I think for me, you can already tell this, like I was the real like type A person coming out of uni into the law firm and then in consulting, where I was like, I'm as smart as any guy in my class, I'm as capable as any man at my level, if not more capable. So these barriers don't affect me. I'm as good or better, so I'm going to be fine.
Yeah.
And then you sort of reach these points where you start to feel it yourself. And that was a real shock to me, because I was like, I'm very smart and I'm very capable and I'm really good at this job, but I'm getting this feedback that is different to what men at my level are getting for doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time, and all of the experimentation that we had around parental leave, I returned to work in a client-facing job share arrangement. The first time that my consulting firm had ever had two people in job share on the client side. And it was amazing. Like, we got great feedback from the clients, because from their perspective, they were getting two people's brains for the price of one.
Yeah,
so
right.
It was a great deal. And the fact that we were in the office 3 days each a week didn't matter to them, because the outcome of the case was the combination of both of our brain power into it. And so we were delivering great results for the clients. We were working in a way that allowed us to be the type of parents that we want to be. But I remember one conversation with a manager who said to me, look, it's all well and good that you're doing this, but really, honestly, like, the fact that you're working part-time and being a parent full-time, that tells me that you want to get top marks in being a parent and you're okay with average marks in consulting. And it was so blatant, right, that you almost think you should have been embarrassed to say that, but he wasn't. But actually, a lot of people think that way. And the fact that he was willing to be the one to say it helped me see how many people thought that. How many people thought the fact that because I was committing to be doing a part-time working role to allow myself to be a parent, that they felt that that was showing less commitment, even though I was working hard, even though I was delivering great results for my clients, even though my clients were very happy. And so I think that kind of thing, when you experience that yourself, it really fuels your fire, and you can choose to take that to either continue working in the same system, or you can choose to take that and go elsewhere, which is ultimately what I did. There were a couple of other similar kind of interactions. There was one case that I was on. At this point, I was working 4 days outside of job share, so just part-time myself, and the manager in the case, because I wasn't there 1 day a week, he was like, well, I can't rely on you to have important pieces of work. So he gave the important work to the man who was more junior in the team. And so, things like that, where you're just like, I can't win in this system. And so you can choose to keep playing a losing game, or you can choose to go and play a different game. Right. And so that was actually the point where I realized this system isn't built for me. Yeah. It's not built to serve me. So why am I serving the system? I'm going to go and find work that will allow me to bring the whole of my brain and all of my talent and energy to delivering great outcomes, without this expectation that if I'm not sitting at my computer 80 hours a week across 5 days, that I'm not committed.
Yeah, and not delivering value, essentially. Yeah. I can already tell, not to blow smoke up your ass, but that you as a mentor deliver a lot of not just advice, but kind of realization. In the short conversation that we had last week, I expressed to you a few difficulties that I've had as a woman in the workplace. The majority of my clients are men, and therefore I've had to shape the way that I communicate with them and interact with them, so that I am actually taken seriously, for one, and that also for two, people don't think I'm flirting with them, which is the craziest thing. Can you imagine if you were a man and you had to kind of adapt in that way? But I have had feedback from male colleagues that I'm overly professional and come across in my emails as cold. And I have to say, this is the way I have to present myself. And it is a shame that we as females have to actually tell people why. We have to say, these are the reasons why I have to do X, Y, and Z. And you described to me as well how it's not okay for us to have the resting bitch face. We have to, consider how we're coming across it every point in every day. But you're right. At what point do you say, this isn't the game that I want to play. This isn't the strategy that I want to go down. I want to play a different game. How do you actually do that as a woman? How do you say, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to go and do that instead? What advice would you give there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing for me in being able to make that call is having a really strong sense of my own purpose, motivation, kind of sense of impact that I want to have. And then being able to kind of measure how much progress I'm making towards that in a given job at a given time. And so for me, what's really motivating is like, I want to have a career that has an impact on the type of world that my daughter grows up in.
Yeah.
You know, and so I have a real long-term view of that. So sort of like a 30 to 50 year kind of time frame. But it's not specific at all. It's just, I want to be doing something that is going to make the world better for her when she's, an older lady. And so if I'm in a job where either I feel like the output of my work isn't contributing to shaping the world in a way that I think it should be shaped, or where I'm not able to bring my whole self and my whole energy to work, that's a good sign for me that I'm in the wrong place. Unless I'm in that period where, it's a recovery job and I'm working to pay the bills in order to give myself time to fund something else. It is a real challenge, right? And again, I think the capitalist systems that we work in aren't built for women to thrive in. That's why so few women thrive, and that's why so few women make it to the top of organizations. But it's not the only system that we can have. And so I think there's a couple of different, in any kind of change making, I think you've got a couple of different roles. You've got the radicals on one side who are like, destroy the system, overthrow the government. You've got the kind of the people who are doing the hard work to be the role models and to show what's possible. You've got the people who are making it safer for the mainstream to take steps in the right direction.
Yeah.
And then you've got the people who are kind of throwing rocks to make sure that it's uncomfortable for them to stay where they are. And so I think about what stage of that kind of change spectrum you want to play at any given time, and it might move. So one of the things that I've been doing a lot at Techstars is focusing on setting a benchmark of what's possible when it comes to diversity in portfolio construction and investment. So our most recent accelerator cohort, 10 out of the 12 companies had at least one woman founder, and 100% of those teams, so all 12, had diversity within their founder teams. When you look at factors like cultural and linguistic diversity, sexuality, age, and gender. And so by doing that, I can kind of say, this is actually what is possible. It's possible for me to do it. That means it's possible for everyone else. And so I do that through my work during the accelerator period. And then outside of that, I do quite a lot of advocacy where I write opinions, I talk amongst the investment community. But in that period, I'm working much more to kind of help push the mainstream to follow to try and hit the benchmark that I've just set, as well as make it uncomfortable for them to not do it. So things that I do in that kind of stage are things more like writing opinion pieces which look at the state of investment in diverse teams across the ecosystem. I will look at funds who have expressed an intention to fund more teams with at least one woman founder, and then I'll look at the actual track record of what they've funded. With another friend of mine, Preeti Mohan, we've been writing a monthly column as part of the Overnight Success newsletter, which is called Funding the Balance, where we look at the published stories of funding announcements across the startup ecosystem by gender of founder. And one of the really interesting things that we've found there as well is that, the state of Australian funding when it comes to diverse teams is shockingly bad, but actually the state of Australian storytelling about funding of diverse teams is even worse. So I think it was almost 92% of the stories that were published in the period that we were looking at this last year were to all male teams. So less than, a little over 8% of stories published had at least one woman founder. And that is much lower than the the funding that goes to teams with at least one woman founder. And so what's happening there? I did ask the question and I got some feedback from some investors, some founders sort of saying, we decided not to announce our raise because we were worried about informing competitors. We don't push our founders. They decide whether they want to announce it or not. But again, there's those opportunities for bias to creep in.
100%.
You could imagine a conversation with an investor and a women-founded team sort of saying, hey, maybe don't announce it. Maybe keep it quiet. You don't want to let your competitors know what's happening. Very kind of preventative. Whereas you might say to male founders, let's get out there. Let's intimidate your competitors. Let's go really bold and show them about your massive funding and, really scare them off. Like, all of that influences the ecosystem overall. And if we're not telling stories about women raising money, other women won't see people that look like them having success in startups, and so won't put their hand up to join. So it's all a big system.
It's making me feel a bit emotional. I don't know. I work with so many female founders all the time, and that's exactly it. I don't think that they get the spotlight shone on them. There is no bloke sitting there and being like, do you know what? Let's put the spotlight on her. Let's show what she's achieved and what she can do. It is often that. It's the rhetoric around it. And interestingly, and I'm sure I'll talk to you about this a bit later, but one of our female-founded businesses who was about to launch a campaign, one of their male shareholders has decided, no, we don't want to go ahead with this fundraise. And she'd also spoken to another one who said, it would be helpful if you would have a man on your finance team to really help you. And she said, but I'm more experienced than anybody should be, even in this role. Why would I need a man? And the man that she was speaking to instantly realized what he'd said and done, and he said, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean it to come across in this way. But it is that unconscious bias that a lot of people don't see, and they do studies on, that trend to invest in male-founded startups versus female-founded startups. And often they say that there is a lot more trust in female founders from shareholders, but they need to be shareholders to begin with. So it just doesn't creep in there. And it's such a shame. How do you think that we can influence that male mindset? And I suspect at Techstars, in a fintech industry, you'd often see a lot of men. How do we work with them to disrupt that imbalance?
I mean, I think there's no silver bullet. That's point one. But I think, there's no silver bullet, but there's a lot of small things that we can do to make an impact in individual situations. And by impacting enough individual situations, we impact the system as a whole. And so, some of the things that I've done through my role at Techstars as a mentor in the ecosystem is helping women founders see these barriers. Like it honestly, and a lot of the times it is that simple, is once you see it, that it's the system, it's not you.
Yeah.
And that is such a powerful realization for a lot of founders. And we know there's been research that shows that, for example, VC investors are more likely to ask female founders preventative questions, whereas they'll ask male founders promotional questions. What's the difference? Preventative questions put you on the back foot. They put you in a kind of lower status position when you're giving your answer. They make you defensive. They talk about things that can go wrong. Whereas promotional questions put you on the front foot. They give you an opportunity to sell your vision. And if you're selling the vision with an investor, you're better able to get them excited. If they're excited, they're more likely to invest. It's such a simple thing. But if you can teach women founders to recognize a preventative question and answer it in a promotional way, you give them an opportunity to beat that system without fighting the system. And so I think that's a lot of what we do, is helping women see the way these things show up, helping them be able to respond to it. I do want to say it's not about fixing women. It is about fixing the system. But in the meantime, we are stuck with the system that we have, and the best way I can think of to try and change that system is get more women in positions of influence, both in terms of founders who go on to raise amazing amounts of capital and build amazing business, but also women who are able to deploy capital as investors, whether because they've been a founder themselves and had an amazing exit. They've been an early employee in a business. They're fund managers in venture capital funds. The more women and diversity more broadly that we get into those decision-making roles and wielders of capital, the more we will sort of have these systemic effects flow through the system. Unfortunately, women investors ask just as many preventative questions to women founders as male investors do. And so there is this kind of educational component that happens as well. But I'm not naive enough to think that once people know better, they'll do better when it comes to these kind of things. It's not always conscious for people. Even when people are aware of their unconscious bias, often that makes it worse, not better. And so we do need to think about all of these different elements. And so when I'm talking to female founders and when I'm mentoring women in the ecosystem, I think my approach is a lot of the time just pointing out the ways that the system sucks and helping them find strategies to be able to deal with it and helping them find their own kind of source of motivation to keep going in the face of those systemic barriers. And so for a lot of women founders, we do see them looking at alternative sources of capital, either bootstrapping their own business, looking to other, revenue generating opportunities, looking to government grants, looking to crowdfund. There's a lot of different ways out there, and the traditional VC pathway, unfortunately, isn't for everybody. And so I think finding ways of building an amazing business is the most important thing that I help mentor people on. Because if we can have more women and founders representing lots of diverse backgrounds, building amazing businesses and talking about their businesses and becoming role models, then we'll see more people coming through the system with that ambition as well.
Absolutely. And hopefully this episode, for people who don't get to have you as a mentor, because there is sadly only one of you, was inspirational for a lot of people. And hopefully it helps people to find their mentor and kind of tailor their journey in the way that suits them and find the energies that will motivate them and keep them going. So thank you so, so much for coming today. I have found this so insightful, so inspirational personally. And I really, really appreciate your time. It's been great to have a chat with you.
Well, thanks for having me.